In this lesson, we begin to think about the Greek verb, how actions or states of being are expressed in the Greek language. The Greek verb system often strikes students as a very complicated one. I would submit, however, that the system itself is really not more complicated, or at least not appreciably more complicated, than the English verb system. It's just that Greek navigates how it expresses, how it packs information about actions into a verbal expression very differently from the way we are accustomed to doing the same thing in English. There is actually fairly little that the Greek verb system can do that isn't regularly expressed also in English, suggesting that the systems are of comparable complexity. It will take us some getting used to, however, to understand that the Greeks did not need a whole string of words, as we do, to express a complex verbal action. Instead, they just tweak the form of the Greek word itself until it contains within itself all the indicators of that verbal action. Now, just as a quick review of what goes into a verb, three basic concepts to keep in mind are tense, voice, and mood. We have all of these in English. We will encounter all of them in Greek, in slightly different ways, to be sure. But the concepts themselves are not foreign to native English speakers, or French or Spanish or German speakers. Tense is something that I think English speakers tend to be most aware of. We have present tense, past tense, and future tense. Even within the past tense, we break that down in English into several different layers. We have a nearer past, and we have a more distant past in our system. Thus, we can talk about an action as happening, or present an action as happening in the here and now. I go to the store. We can present an action as having happened in some time before the now. I went to the store. Or even further behind in time, I had gone to the store. We can present actions as something that will happen in the future. It's not yet reality, but we can present it as something that's something one can bank on. I will go to the store. So tense is very common, very familiar to us. Voice is very common, equally common, in fact, but we tend on the whole, not to be as aware of voice, or at least of the grammatical categories of voice. But English has an active voice and a passive voice, just like Greek. An active voice sentence is one in which the subject of the verb is doing the action to some other entity, often a direct object in the sentence. Let's just shift to another sample sentence. What comes to mind is my wrestling with my dog just prior to putting this lecture together. And my dog loves to nibble and interact with his teeth gently. He's a good dog, but let's go with that. An active voice sentence would be something like, I bit my dog. Now that didn't actually happen, I want to assure you, before you start calling PETA or what have you. Largely because I'd get too much fur in my mouth. But I bit my dog is an active voice sentence because the subject, the subject of the verb bit, is performing this action upon some other entity. In this case, the poor dog. A passive voice construction is one in which the subject is the recipient of the action. It's still in the sentence I was bit, I was bitten by my dog. In this case, I is still the subject of the verb was bitten, but the I, in fact, is the recipient of the action of the biting. Hence, the real doer of the action is somewhere else in the sentence, in this case, in the prepositional phrase, by my dog. Greek has the same sorts of constructions, very much parallel. It also has what is called a middle voice, which we will not encounter in today's lesson, but it will crop up soon enough. The middle voice is one in which the subject performs the action, but very often the only entity affected by the action is the subject himself or herself, whether because the verb is something that can't be done to some object, like the verbs of coming and going in Greek are expressed in middle voice, because the subject is doing it, but the subject isn't doing it to anyone else. At the end of the day, when I go, I'm the one that moves. So the Greek has invented the middle voice for things like that, and also verbs that tend to be reflexive, or the performance of which tends to be to the advantage of the subject. So we'll encounter that sort of thing in a few lessons. The third major concept is mood. Namely, what kind of action is the verb talking about? Is the verb presenting an action as if it is a past, present, or future fact? Whether or not it truly is an actual fact, it's being presented as a real action. If that's the case, we're using the indicative mood. The indicative mood is the general mood of telling stories, narrating events, formulating very often arguments or what have you. If you tell someone in Greece, as in Egypt, what you did this morning, you'll be using the indicative mood virtually all the time. Is the action something that is not real yet, but is somehow contingent, either upon some other action, or upon some other party taking up your invitation to act, or what have you? In Greek, one would be using the subjunctive mood for such a thing. So when one has expressions of purpose in Greek, one often finds the verb that denotes the purpose for which some other action is going to happen in the subjunctive mood. I went to the store in order that I might buy meat. I went to the store would be in the indicative mood, but in order that I might buy meat, which is a contingent action upon the action of the main clause, could be expressed in Greek in the subjunctive. Is the action even further removed from reality? Is it in the realm of possibility or wish? In these instances, Greek uses the optative mood, the least real, the most in the realm of possibility mood. And then, of course, there's also the imperative. The action doesn't denote something that's happened. It denotes something that an action that is being called for, that some other entity is being summoned to perform. Do your homework. Study Greek. In I don't know why those come to mind. In expressions like that, the action is not presumed to be real or happening. I'm glad you all are studying Greek. I'm glad you all are doing your homework. But it's being presented as an action that needs to be done by some other entity. Hence, it is a command. And then there is the rather nondescript mood of the infinitive, which is just the bare verbal action itself. To go, to study, to learn. Now, verbs also have person and number. This refers mainly to the doer of the verb, the subject of the verb, the doer of the verb in the case of active voice sentences. So in English, we have exactly the same structure as in Greek. We have first-person subjects, I and we, the I being the singular first person, the we being the plural first person subject. We have second person subjects. We have a singular you, and in some regions at least, we have a plural you. Down where I am living currently, it's y'all. In Chicago, it's yous. Maybe also the metropolitan area around New York. Can't quite remember. Those are regional dialects for us, but for Greek speakers, there was a formal difference between the singular you and the plural y'all, just as there is in most Western European languages. And then we also have third person singular and third person plural. He, she, or it does some action. That's a third person singular expression. They do some action. That's a third person plural expression. Now, all of these building blocks of a verb are basically familiar to us, but the ways in which these components of an action are encoded in an actual expression is very different between English and Greek, and that is what students are challenged to wrap their heads around as they learn this language. In English, we tend to use different words to supply or give cues about the various components of a verbal action. Thus, we always indicate the subject of a verb with a separate word, very often a pronoun like those that we just reviewed on the last slide. I, we, you, he, she, it, or they, or with some noun or proper noun, a name or what have you, as the subject. We often use helping verbs, not the verb that carries the basic action that we're talking about, but other verbs used in conjunction with it. So for example, taking the verb to save. We, in our language, have all manner of other verbs that help us position save, or the idea of saving, in regard to time, in regard to mood, and in regard to voice. All of this happens in Greek by alterations to the one Greek word that is the verb itself. Thus, the English expression, you will save, gives us three linguistic markers. You is the marker of the subject, the doer of this action. Will is a helping verb that is the marker of future time, that kind of cues us in that this action hasn't happened, isn't happening, but is going to happen in some future time. And save is the marker of the actual action that we're talking about. The same word in Greek is soses. So instead of three words, Greek speakers only needed one string of sounds that formed a single locution, soses. And within this word, so is the marker of actual action. The second sigma, in the dead center of the word, is the marker of future time, in effect corresponding to our will. And the ace at the end is the marker of who's doing the action, the subject, and of the fact that it is an active voice construction. So, all of the components that go into the English you will save can be observed in soses, but of course it is expressed very differently. For another example, let's look at a future passive construction. I will be saved. English, 4 words. Each of these words contributing something important to understanding what the speaker of this sentence is trying to say. The I is the marker of the subject, that entity about which the verb is saying something. Will is again, as in our first example, a marker of future tense. Now the introduction of another helping verb, this time be, is a marker of the passive construction. And then the word saved, as opposed to save, the word saved gives us the actual action, but also reinforces the passive construction along with the word be. So I will be saved, we've got, person and number in the I, we've got tense in the will, we've got voice in the be and the letter D at the end of the verb, and we've got the basic meaning of the action in the fourth word, save. Greek has all of these components as well, but again, it's able to formulate it in a single word, sothesomai. Now you can tell already that a lot is up with Greek verbs, because we just saw an example, so says, and that meant you will save. Now we're looking at sothesomai, I will be saved. There's not a whole lot of overlap between those two forms. The only thing that we could probably recognize off the top here is the syllable so, which is the marker of the actual action, saving. So says, so thesomai. But almost everything else is different. We have then next two letters, the, functioning as the marker of passive voice. We do have that sigma again in the middle of the word as a marker of future time. And then we have omai, the last two syllables, marking the subject and also reinforcing the passive voice of the construction. So again, the components are all there, but it's going to take some work on our part getting used to understanding how Greek writers, Greek speakers put all those components together. And so we're going to spend a lot of time analyzing Greek verb forms for this information so we can discern what the nature of the action is in terms of tense, voice, mood, person, and number, all of which are important to know if we're actually going to understand what the verb is trying to communicate. One final example, just to throw some more variables out there. Now let's look at a past tense action, something we would call, even in English, a perfect active construction. This is not just simple past, which would be you saved, but more of a completed past. You have saved. So, for example, we could imagine a hymn or a prayer, you have saved us. And because of that, we are yours. So there's some implication in the perfect tense of a completed action that has some consequences, even in the present time. You have saved us, and therefore we are safe. Something like that. Anyway, in that construction, we have three separate words. You, again, is the marker of the subject. Have is another helping verb. We encountered will in regards to the future tense examples. Now we have the helping verb have or has as a marker of past time. And then we have the word saved, which really has two markers. The one is the actual action in the word save, and here the final D is reinforcing the past time. Notice that D, this is what would make English difficult for another speaker. The word saved, that final D could be a reinforcer of passive voice or a reinforcer of past tense. That's got to give a lot of non-native English learners headaches, just like, Greek will pose some challenges for us. In Greek, this expression you have saved is sesokos. Sesokos. Now, something odd has happened here. Now the marker of actual action is in the middle of this word, so. It is still there, the sigma omega, it's still there, but it's in the middle. To mark past time, especially perfect tense time, Greek adds a syllable to the front of the marker of the actual action. And then instead of a sigma toward the middle of the word, we have a kappa marking active voice in the perfect tense. And then we have alpha sigma, as, as the marker of the subject. And that particular ending also reinforces that it's active voice. So again, the components are all there, but they're all conveyed by the changes in the word itself, as opposed to in pronouns indicating subjects and helping verbs indicating often time and voice and also mood. I didn't put any subjunctive or optative examples here, but I could easily have said, you would have saved us. Well, that's not a real action. That's not an indicative quality action. That's an action that sounds like it didn't happen. But the word would in English, a helping verb, is put in to change the mood or to change the mode from real to unreal. Greek has those changes too, but again, it's all performed through some changes to some component of the word itself. So that's what we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about as we work through the verb system in Greek. And in this week's lesson, we come to our first building block of the Greek verbal system, the present active indicative. Present active indicative are three words locating the verb in terms of its tense, present, its voice, active, and its mood, indicative. These are actions that are related as occurring in the now, hence they're present. They're actions performed by the subject, hence active voice. And they are actions that are related as in some sense real or actually happening, hence indicative. I just should emphasize that the indicative mood does not demonstrate the facticity of that action. It's just the mode in which the action is presented. So for example, when we use a joke that starts, "A man walks into a bar," it's presented as a real action happening in the now. But of course, the story we're about to tell is not a real story. It's probably a bad joke that's going nowhere. The second man ducked. Something like that. Now, what's really going to be important for us to pay attention to in this week with present active indicative verbs will be the endings. The verb stem will give us the root meaning, the basic meaning of the action. What is the action that is being spoken of? But it is to the ending that we will have to look to determine who is doing the action. So you will learn your first set of Greek endings, and I would highly encourage you to memorize as many of these sets as humanly possible. So these 6 endings are in effect the equivalents of our pronouns when we talk about first, second, and third person subjects. An omega after the present tense stem signals that an I is doing the action. Ace, epsilon iota sigma, signals that a singular you is said to be doing the action. Epsilon iota signals that some third-person singular entity, some he, she, or it, is presented as doing the action. Omen, the omicron mu epsilon nu, is the first-person plural ending, suggesting or communicating that some we is doing the action. Ete, epsilon tau epsilon, communicates that some plural second-person group, some y'all, is doing the action. And usin, the diphthong omicron upsilon, followed by sigma iota nu, indicates that some third-person plural group, some they, is doing this action. A word about that last ending. The nu might or might not show up. The verb could end in usin or usi. Either way, it's a third plural ending. And in ideally written Greek, it's usi before another word that starts with a consonant. It's usin before another word that starts with a vowel. But that's not a hard and fast practice in New Testament Greek. So let's look at a verb, lego, which is one of the vocabulary verbs, one of the vocabulary words in lesson 2. And the verb lego with that ending omega means I say. The basic stem, the basic present stem is leg, and that indicates the action of communicating something. With the omega, it communicates that some I is saying. Lego, I say. Leges. In leges, you look to the epsilon iota sigma to find the subject. That's a second person singular. You say. You are saying. Lege. The third singular ending, epsilon iota. Some he, she, or it is saying or says. You can imagine that lege is a form that is very common in the New Testament. Whenever someone is saying something to someone else, half the time, lege is the expression that's used. He says this, or Scripture says this. Legomen. The amen ending indicates we as the subject of the verb. Hence, we say, we are saying. Legete. The eta is y'all, or yous, if you prefer. Legete, y'all are saying, y'all say. Legusi, or legusin, they are saying. So, in this first chapter, as you do the exercises, you'll be paying very close attention to what happens after the stem of a verb. And you'll know what the stem is, because in the vocabulary, these are all given in the first person singular form. Lego, grapho, didasco, and what have you. If you just drop the omega, which is the first person singular ending, you'll have the stem. So, as you learn the vocabulary, just bear that in mind. The stem is everything up to the omega. There's one other form that you will be learning in this lesson, and that's the present active infinitive. The infinitive does not have person or number, hence it is infinite. It is just the action itself. It is not limited. It is not made more finite by being ascribed to a he, she, it, you, or I, or we, or what have you. It is just the bare action. And so infinitives are almost always dependent verbal forms on something else. English infinitives, for example, whenever you encounter to do, to be, or not, to speak, to write, expressions like this, these are infinitives. And they often flesh out the main verb or indicate the purpose of the main verb. So, for example, if I were to say, I want, well, what do you want? The verb want cries out for some kind of object. If I want something, there'll be a direct object there. I want a cup of coffee. But if the thing wanted is an action, it will be expressed with an infinitive. I want to speak. I want to study. Whatever. He came to save. In that second example, that's far more purposive than simply filling out the meaning of the verb. He came in order to save. But again, in English, we simply use an infinitive for that. And an infinitive by itself is another way in which Greek writers and Greek speakers could express purpose as well. We seek to rule. We are looking for something. What is that? It's expressed with an infinitive, if what we're seeking is not sheep, say, but an action. We seek to rule. Now, the present active infinitive in Greek is formed from the basic present stem. So with lego, again, it's leg. That's the basic present stem. Adding the ending epsilon iota nu. Legein means to speak. Now, careful here. Already you can see the difference between the second singular, you, the third singular, the he, she, or it ending, and the infinitive ending is just one letter. Is it a? Is it ace? Is it ain? And ain is being thrown into this lesson as a seventh form, a seventh ending that you need to commit to your memory as an infinitive ending. And just so you've heard it now, the present active infinitive in Greek is not the simple infinitive. It is not the infinitive that we would translate as to speak or to write. It has an added nuance. The present tense, outside of the indicative mood especially, has the nuance of being in the thick of the action that is being expressed. So very often this will be translated, if you want to capture that nuance, as not to speak, legein, but to go about speaking. To be involved and in the thick of the action of speaking. Of course, that'll never do as a translation. So to go about speaking. Sometimes to keep on speaking, to continue speaking. Different English expressions can be used in different contexts to capture that added nuance of the present active infinitive. There's another infinitive in Greek, which we'll come to in quite a few weeks, which is the more simple infinitive. So I'll just introduce that difference to you now so that you're not unlearning something about the present infinitive when we get to that other infinitive. Now, as you work through this material, I would especially like you to, as you turn to the vocabulary on page 7, and as you memorize those words, because they're all very common words in the New Testament, all of the words in the vocabulary lists tend to be the more common ones, and the more you commit to your mind, the more fluid will be your engagement with the New Testament, and therefore the more likely you will be to continue. Because if at the end of 2 semesters you still have to look up every word, it'll be a slow, turgid, onerous process that you are not likely to continue long into your life. Now, as you go through these words, I would ask you to go through the entire paradigm of the present active indicative and the present active infinitive that we just learned, and that will help reinforce the endings and their meaning. So, akuo, you could just say, okay, akuo means I hear, akuo means I hear, and go on with your life. But go to yourself, akuo, I hear, akues, you hear, akue, he, she, or it hears, akuomen, we hear, akuete, y'all hear, akuusin, they hear. And do that for each one of these so you get used to the different endings, their meanings. You reinforce them around these different verbs. The endings will be the same for all of these verbs, but the reinforcement really is helpful, even necessary. Blepo, I see. Blep is the stem. You just get rid of the omega at the end, and you've got the stem for all the other forms in the present. Blepes, you see. Blepe, she sees. Blepamen, we see. Blepete, y'all see. Blepusi, they see. And so forth. work through that until you can do it by memory, so that I can say, hey, what's the present active infinitive paradigm of gnosko? And any one of you could report back, on the spot. Gnosko, I know. Gnoskes, you know. Gnoske, he knows, and also, and so on. Notice that in the vocabulary list there are a few non-verbs, but these are especially important and common. The word kai, which tends to mean and. You can only imagine how many times kai appears in the New Testament. It's in the thousands. It often means and. It can also be used like an adverb as a kind of intensifier. Even, indeed. But for now, and. There's the word u, which means not. Again, an exceedingly common word. It appears in 3 different forms. U negates, generally these are used to negate verbs. Sometimes they negate a noun. They always appear right before the thing that they negate. So if u, let me start that sentence again. The form u is used before a word beginning with a consonant. U gnosko, I do not know. The form uk with a kappa at the end is used when the next word starts with a vowel. Uk akuo, I don't hear. Is used when the next word begins with a vowel and a rough breathing. We don't have any examples of that in today's vocabulary list, but just bear in mind that is the third form that you might encounter. All of them simply are negators. We translate them not. And then there is this word haughty. Haughty. It's small, but it's got a rough breathing there. Haughty. So if we were to transliterate this into English, it would be H-O-T-I. Haughty can have 2 very different meanings. Haughty can introduce a dependent clause giving the content of some main verb. In that instance, it would be translated as that in English. Akuo haughty, I hear that she's going out with so-and-so. Or gnosko haughty, I know that my Redeemer lives. Haughty can also introduce another kind of dependent clause that articulates the cause of the main verb, in which case we tend to translate the haughty as because. Lego haughty gnosko, I speak because I know. Well, that's a lousy example, but I'm trying to work with the 10 words in front of me, so bear with me. And then also, just so that Clayton can use more third-person forms, he throws 2 nouns at you in this vocabulary. Adelphos, which means brother, and adelphe, which means sister. We're going to actually learn the noun forms in lessons 3 and 4, but for now, he presents these 2 forms, which are the forms used when brother or sister is the subject of a verb. So that will get you through, pardon the sudden movement on your screen, these exercises. Translate these exercises, and as you do so, memorize the vocabulary first. Try to get it down and get those endings down so that perhaps you're not having to flip back to page 7 and to page 9 or wherever that paradigm was, but you can just kind of work these out for yourself. And obviously, what you want to look at is not just the first part of a verb, which will tell you the action that is being contemplated, but also the second part of the verb, which will communicate the subject, the one who is doing this action. And watch out, Just because the subject of the first verb is amen doesn't mean that the subject of other verbs in the sentence will be amen. It could be ete. And ete could be part of a verb that governs a form of the infinitive, didaskein. So do your best to work these through, and you will have access to the answers. Obviously, it's only good to look at the answers after you've really wrestled and given a try with the translation yourself. And then when you see afterward what the answer is, if there is any difference between your translation and the answer, try to figure out why. And if you understand where the difference came from, you're all set. You really have learned something and you're good to go. If you can't see where the difference comes from, that's an important thing to mark and bring back to our class next Monday when we're face-to-face and have the opportunity to ask any questions that we had about the homework. We won't have to go over the homework this way. You will self-correct, and the goal will then be to see what, after self-correcting, you don't understand, so we can close those loops and move on to the work of the next lessons. Also, I'm asking you to do the English to Greek exercises. Now, sometimes students say, why do I have to learn how to write and compose Greek? I'm never going to do this for the rest of my life. Well, that's probably true. But there is no better way to think your way into how Greek language is put together than try to put your native language, something in your native language, into that foreign language. English to Greek is where you really think through Greek and get a grasp of Greek. And that's why almost all Greek textbooks include an English to Greek section. It's not for those who are going to speak ancient Greek, nowhere. But it is because it is pedagogically really the best way to think in the foreign language as opposed to merely decoding it back into English. Now, I'm not asking you to look at the Septuagint and New Testament materials today. We might pick a few of them apart together next Monday. There are a number of words in here that you could make out well enough, but there are a number of words also that you couldn't, so I don't want to frustrate you that too much the first week out. But we can look over them together in our next face-to-face tutorial. I hope this presentation has been clear and positions you well to engage this first bit of real Greek grammar material and take your first steps in working out translations one way and the other.